10 years ago, my father sent me a text message that shattered my entire world. It was the day before my college graduation, and instead of telling me how proud he was, he told me I was disowned. All because I refused to give my hard-earned graduation tickets to his new wife and her spoiled children. My mother and my brother backed him up, leaving me completely alone on what should have been the best day of my life. 10 years later, my father needed my signature on a single document to save his multi-million-dollar retirement plan. I replied with just 4 words and watched his entire empire collapse. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The humid Atlanta air clung to my graduation gown as I stood on the pristine green campus of Spelman College. I was 22 years old and running on pure exhaustion and adrenaline. For 4 years, I had worked multiple part-time jobs to maintain my academic scholarships and keep my head above water. I spent countless nights studying until dawn in the library, determined to make something of myself. Now I was just 24 hours away from walking across that stage with honors. I was adjusting my black cap in the reflection of a heavy glass door, admiring the maroon sash draped over my shoulders, when my phone vibrated deep in my pocket. I smiled, pulling it out. I fully expected it to be my father, Derek Sr., letting me know what time his flight was landing at the Atlanta airport. He was the owner of a highly lucrative commercial logistics company, and he prided himself on strict punctuality and controlling every itinerary. Instead, the message that flashed across my screen made the breath catch violently in my throat. The text read, "You did not leave any tickets for the children at the box office. You have disrespected my wife and this family for the absolute last time. Cancel my hotel reservation. I am not coming, and you are financially cut off. Do not ever contact me again." My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone onto the concrete walkway. I stood frozen, reading the words over and over again, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. I immediately pressed the call button, bringing the phone to my ear. I listened to the dial tone ring once, then twice. Finally, someone picked up the line. But it was not my father. It was Valerie. My father had married her 2 years prior, and she had immediately made it her personal mission to replace me with her own 2 teenagers. Valerie was a master manipulator who used a fake sweet voice to hide her venom. "Hello, Renee," Valerie said, her voice dripping with that artificial southern sweetness she had perfected over the years. "Did you get your father message?" I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. "Put my dad on the phone, Valerie," I demanded, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "This is ridiculous. The university only gave us 4 graduation tickets total. I gave 2 to him and 2 to my biological mother. I do not have extra tickets for your children." Valerie sighed loudly, making sure I heard her exaggerated disappointment through the speaker. "You are always so terribly selfish, Renee. This is exactly why your father is so stressed out all the time. We are your new family now. You should have given your mother tickets to my kids, so we could all sit together as a united front. You are purposely excluding my children from a family event, and your father will not tolerate that kind of blatant disrespect." Before I could even defend myself against her twisted logic, I heard loud rustling on the other end of the line. My father's booming voice suddenly came through the speaker, overpowering her. "You are a bitter and ungrateful child, Renee," he barked, not even giving me a single chance to speak. "I pay for your cell phone bill and I occasionally send you grocery money, and this is how you repay my generosity, by embarrassing my wife and treating her children like garbage." "Dad," I pleaded, feeling hot tears threatening to spill over my carefully applied makeup. "Please do not do this right now. It is my graduation day tomorrow. I worked so hard for this degree. I just want my parents in the audience. I do not have any more tickets to give you. I begged the administration office, but they are at maximum capacity." "I do not care," my father snapped coldly, his tone devoid of any parental warmth. "You either find 2 more tickets right now or you can consider yourself fatherless. Actually, do not even bother trying. You have already ruined the entire mood of this trip. I am not flying out to Atlanta to watch a selfish brat walk across a stage. I am canceling my flight immediately. Valerie and I are taking the kids to Miami instead for a real vacation. Do not call this number again. You are disowned." The line went completely dead. A sharp beep signaled that he had hung up on me. The silence in my ear was deafening. I slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. I stood there paralyzed in the middle of the bustling campus quad. All around me, other students were hugging their proud parents, taking joyful photographs and laughing brightly under the warm sun. The contrast between their happiness and my sudden devastation was suffocating. My father had always been a man who demanded absolute submission. Growing up in his house meant walking on eggshells and agreeing with whatever false narrative made him look like the hero. When he left my mother for Valerie, he expected everyone to just fall in line and worship his new wife. I refused to play the game, and this was my ultimate punishment. He deliberately waited until the most important moment of my entire life to pull the rug out from under me. He wanted to maximize the emotional damage to teach me a lesson about power and control. I swallowed the hard lump forming in my throat. I refused to let them break me in public. I wiped a single tear from my cheek and unlocked my phone again. I needed someone to tell me this was just a bad dream. I needed my mother. I dialed my mother number, my fingers still trembling slightly. Brenda had always played the victim in her divorce from my father, using her tears as currency to get whatever she wanted from him. She relied heavily on his alimony and his guilt to maintain a lifestyle she refused to work for. I held the phone to my ear, praying she would finally act like a mother and defend me against his tyranny. She answered on the fourth ring over the loud hum of a hairdryer. She was at the salon getting her weekly blowout. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking. "Dad just called me. He is not coming to my graduation tomorrow. He disowned me because I did not give his new wife my extra tickets." I waited for the gasp of maternal outrage. I waited for her to tell me that she was packing her bags and driving to Atlanta right now to stand in the front row for her daughter. Instead, the line was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment before she let out a sharp, irritated sigh. "Renee? Are you out of your mind?" She snapped, her voice dropping to an angry whisper. "Why would you provoke your father right now? Do you have any idea what you have done?" I blinked, staring blankly at a brick wall in front of me. "Mom, he demanded tickets I do not have. He told me I'm cut off." "And you should have found those tickets," she hissed. "You should have bought them from another student or given up your own seat. Your father is supposed to pay off my American Express bill next week. If he is mad at you, he is going to take it out on me and withhold my alimony check. You need to call him back. Swallow your pride and apologize right this second. Do not mess up my money, Renee." A cold wave washed over me, completely freezing the tears that had been threatening to fall. My own mother did not care that my heart was breaking. She did not care that her daughter was graduating with honors from a prestigious, historically black college. She only cared about her American Express bill and her alimony check. "Mom," I whispered, feeling a profound emptiness expanding in my chest. "I have no money. I have no family coming to support me. I am entirely alone." "You are 22 years old and you are being dramatic," she replied coldly. "I am not getting involved in this mess and risking my financial security because you decided to play a stupid game of respect with Valerie. Text your father an apology and tell him you found the tickets. Figure it out." She hung up. The dial tone echoed in my ear, sounding like the final nail in the coffin of my childhood. My mother had made her choice. She chose a man who abandoned her over the daughter who loved her. She chose comfort over loyalty. And in that exact moment, the terrified, desperate girl inside me died. I lowered the phone and took a deep breath of the humid Georgia air. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just felt a quiet, absolute clarity settle over my mind. The next morning, the Spelman College campus was a sea of absolute joy and black excellence. The sun was shining brightly over the majestic brick buildings, and the air was thick with the scent of magnolias and expensive perfume. Families were everywhere. Proud fathers holding bouquets of roses, mothers adjusting their daughters' caps, grandmothers crying tears of joy, and brothers shouting words of encouragement. The energy was electric, buzzing with the collective triumph of hundreds of young Black women stepping into their power. I sat in the middle of the graduating class wearing my black robe and my maroon sash, surrounded by a sea of my peers. They were chattering excitedly, pointing into the massive crowd to locate their cheering sections. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead. I did not need to search the crowd, because I already knew what was waiting for me. When the dean finally called my name, Renee Williams, summa cum laude, the sound of polite applause rippled through the audience. There were no air horns blowing for me. There were no customized banners waving in the air. There was no father standing up to shout, "That is my baby girl." I walked across the wooden stage, my heels clicking steadily against the floorboards. I shook the dean hand and accepted my diploma. As I turned to face the audience for the official photograph, my eyes instinctively drifted toward the center section of the lawn. Section 4, Row G. The exact seats I had fought so hard to secure. There were 4 empty folding chairs sitting right in the middle of a packed crowd. They looked like a glaring physical manifestation of my family emotional absence, a blatant reminder that I was not enough for them. Not smart enough, not compliant enough, not worthy enough to celebrate. My father was probably lounging on a beach in Miami with Valerie and her kids right now. My mother was probably swiping her credit card at a boutique in Chicago, perfectly content to let me stand on this stage alone. The photographer flashed his camera, capturing the moment. I smiled, but it was a smile devoid of any warmth. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized that her blood relatives were nothing more than genetic strangers. I gripped the leather binding of my diploma tightly, feeling the embossed letters against my fingertips. This piece of paper represented 4 years of surviving on instant ramen, 4 years of sleep deprivation, and 4 years of relentless determination. I earned this completely by myself. They did not pay my tuition. They did not write my essays. They did not wipe my tears during finals week. I did. Walking off that stage, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never again allow them to hold power over my emotions or my future. I would take the pain they caused me and forge it into an unbreakable armor. They wanted to disown me and treat me like a failure just because I refused to bow down to their toxic demands. They wanted to see me broken and begging for their financial scraps. I decided right then and there that I would build an empire so vast and so powerful that one day they would be the ones begging me for scraps. I did not know how long it would take or what I had to sacrifice to get there, but I knew I would succeed. The empty seats in that audience were not a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of their tragic inability to appreciate greatness. The ceremony ended and the lawn erupted into a chaotic, beautiful celebration. I did not linger. I did not stay for the alumni reception or the department photos. I walked straight past the hugging families and the crying mothers holding my head high. I navigated my way out of the campus gates, walking toward my off-campus apartment to pack my bags and leave this chapter of my life behind permanently. But the universe had one more cruel joke to play on me before I could finally escape. I was about to find out that my father, Petty Revenge, did not just stop at boycotting my graduation. He wanted to make sure I was completely destroyed before I even had a chance to start my new life. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than usual. The streets of Atlanta were sweltering, but I felt completely numb to the heat. Every step I took away from the campus was a step away from the illusion of a supportive family. I thought about all the holidays I had ruined my own peace just to keep them happy. The Thanksgivings where I bit my tongue while Valerie made passive-aggressive remarks about my weight or my hair. The Christmases where my brother DJ was showered with expensive gifts while I received generic gift cards because my father claimed he did not know what I liked. They had always made it abundantly clear who mattered in their world and who was just an afterthought. DJ was the golden child, the heir apparent to my father's logistics company, even though he barely scraped by in college and lacked any real business sense. My father saw himself in DJ, and therefore DJ could do no wrong. I was just the rebellious daughter who asked too many questions and refused to be a quiet, obedient accessory to their perfect family image. I reached the modest duplex I rented just a few blocks away from the university. The paint was peeling on the front porch, and the steps creaked under my weight. It was not much, but it had been my sanctuary for the past 2 years. My plan was simple. I was going to pack my clothes, my books, and my diploma into the trunk of the old Honda Civic my father had let me use for the past 3 years and drive straight to Chicago. I had secured a grueling entry-level position at a financial firm there. The pay was terrible, and the hours were brutal, but it was my ticket out of the South and away from their toxic orbit. As I turned the corner and walked up the driveway, my steps faltered. Parked right behind my battered Honda Civic was a brand new gleaming white Range Rover. I immediately recognized the customized license plate. It was my brother DJ and his newlywed white wife, Courtney. My heart sank. There was absolutely no reason for them to be here in Atlanta unless my father had sent them to do his dirty work. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, and marched up the wooden steps to face whatever fresh hell they had brought to my doorstep. I was done crying. I was done begging. I was ready for war. DJ and Courtney were standing on my cramped front porch, looking like they had just stepped out of a country club catalog. DJ was wearing a pastel polo shirt that stretched over his softening stomach, a physical testament to his lazy lifestyle fully funded by my father. Standing next to him was Courtney, his new white wife, clutching a designer handbag like the neighborhood was going to contaminate her. She was a real estate agent back in Atlanta who specialized in selling gentrified properties, and she never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how cultured and successful she believed she was. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Courtney said, her lips curling into a condescending smirk as I walked up the steps. She looked me up and down, taking in my graduation gown and my graduation cap resting on top of my natural curls. "I see you actually went to the ceremony even though your father explicitly told you not to. And that hair, Renee honey, if you are planning to move to Chicago and get a real corporate job, you might want to look into chemical relaxers or at least a sleek wig. Natural hair just reads as so unprofessional for job hunting." I stared at her, feeling a familiar disgust. Courtney was the queen of microaggressions, always dropping little racist insults disguised as helpful advice. She loved playing the white savior to DJ while subtly putting down any black woman who did not conform to her narrow Eurocentric standards. "My hair is the least of your concerns, Courtney," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I graduated summa cum laude today. My brain got me the job in Chicago, not my hair. Now why are you two standing on my porch like a couple of debt collectors?" DJ stepped forward, puffing out his chest, trying to channel the same domineering energy our father possessed, but he just looked pathetic. "Watch your tone, Renee," he barked. "Dad sent us to handle some family business since you decided to be a disrespectful brat to Valerie and ruin the entire graduation weekend." "Ruin the weekend?" I asked incredulously. "He disowned me over text message because I did not magically produce extra tickets for his stepchildren." DJ rolled his eyes. "Whatever. You always play the victim. Dad is done funding your little rebellion. Hand over the keys to the Honda Civic." I froze. The Honda Civic was a beat-up 10-year-old car with a cracked bumper and a faulty transmission, but it was my only way to get to Chicago. "Dad gave me that car 3 years ago," I said, my voice tightening. "I need it to move. My new job starts in a week." Dad said. "Failures do not get to drive his cars," DJ sneered, quoting our father word for word. "The car is registered in his company name, and he wants it back immediately. He is giving it to Valerie's son for his 16th birthday. Hand over the keys, Renee, or I am calling the police and reporting it stolen." The sheer cruelty of it took my breath away. They were completely stripping me of my mobility, my dignity, and my resources on the very day I should have been celebrating my college degree. My own brother was standing there acting as an eager henchman for the man who was actively trying to destroy me. "And while you are at it," DJ added, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket, "Dad contacted your landlord. Since Dad was the guarantor on this lease and you just graduated, the lease is officially terminated effective today. The landlord let us in an hour ago to pack your junk." He pointed to the side of the porch. Two cheap suitcases were sitting on the uneven floorboards, packed haphazardly with my clothes and books. They had literally thrown my life into a couple of bags and dragged them outside like trash. The sky above us darkened, matching the sudden storm brewing inside me. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and heavy drops of rain began to fall, hitting the wooden porch and soaking into my graduation gown. You are kicking me out on the street with nothing I asked, staring at the brother I used to play video games with when we were kids. You kicked yourself out when you chose pride over family, DJ replied coldly. He snatched the Honda car key straight out of my hand before I could even process what was happening. He turned to Courtney, who was looking at me with an expression of pure pitying triumph. "Let us go, babe," DJ said. "It smells like broke around here." DJ paused at the top of the stairs. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said, turning back to me. He pulled my apartment keys out of his pocket, the ones the landlord had presumably asked him to collect. Instead of handing them to me, he locked my front door and then casually tossed the keys over the railing straight into the tall, wet grass of the front yard. "Good luck in Chicago, Renee," Courtney called out cheerfully as they rushed to their pristine Range Rover to escape the rain. "Maybe you can take a bus." I stood completely still on that porch as the rain poured down harder, soaking my graduation cap and pasting my natural curls to my face. The taillights of the Range Rover disappeared down the street, leaving me stranded with two suitcases, a useless college degree, and exactly $0 to my name. This was rock bottom. This was the exact moment they wanted me to break down, to call my father, crying and begging for forgiveness, to agree to whatever humiliating terms he and Valerie demanded. But I did not cry. I let the rain wash over me, feeling every ounce of residual love for the Williams family drain out of my body. They were dead to me. All of them. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently in my pocket, cutting through the sound of the heavy rain. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the water. It was an unfamiliar phone number with an Atlanta area code. I swiped to answer, bringing the cold, wet phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice raspy and exhausted. "Is this Renee Williams?" A formal, older male voice asked on the other end. "Yes, speaking." "Mrs. Williams, my name is Elias Harrison. I was the estate lawyer for your late grandfather, Derek Williams I. I realize this is highly unexpected, but I have been instructed to contact you on the exact day of your college graduation. My grandfather had passed away when I was 15. He was the founder of the original logistics company that my father eventually took over and expanded. My grandfather was a tough, brilliant man who had always favored me over DJ because he said I had the fire of a true entrepreneur. "What is this about Mr. Harrison?" I asked, wiping rain from my eyes. "Your grandfather was a very cautious man, Mrs. Williams." The lawyer continued, his tone steady and professional. "Before he passed away, he established a locked generational trust. He gave explicit legal instructions that no one in your family, absolutely no one, including your father, was to know about its existence until the triggering event occurred." A locked trust. I repeated the words, feeling foreign on my tongue. "What triggering event?" The lawyer paused, a sound of shuffling papers echoing through the phone. "There are two conditions. The first was your successful graduation from a 4-year university. Congratulations on that achievement, by the way." "Thank you," I whispered, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "And the second condition." "The second condition is time," Mr. Harrison replied. "The trust and all its contents are completely sealed and legally inaccessible until your 30th birthday. I am calling to officially notify you of your status as the primary beneficiary and to advise you to keep this information strictly confidential. Your father does not know, your brother does not know, and they must not know until the time comes." "What is inside the trust?" Mr. Harrison, I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my hand ached. "I am legally bound not to disclose the exact assets until your 30th birthday," he answered. "But I will tell you this, Mrs. Williams. Your grandfather knew exactly what kind of man your father would become. He told me once that you were the only one strong enough to protect the legacy, survive these next 8 years, build your own life. And when you turn 30, everything changes. The line disconnected, leaving me standing in the pouring rain with a dead phone in my hand. I looked at the locked door of my former apartment, then down at my two cheap suitcases sitting in puddles of water. I had no car, no home, and a family that had just tried to bury me alive. But for the first time that day, I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that promised absolute ruin for anyone who ever doubted me. Survive these next 8 years, the lawyer had said. I grabbed the handles of my suitcases, pulling them out into the rain. I was not just going to survive. I was going to conquer. I was going to walk into Chicago with absolutely nothing, and I was going to build a silent empire right under their noses. And when my 30th birthday finally arrived, they would all pay for what they did today. The Greyhound bus ride to Chicago took 14 agonizing hours. I sat near the back watching the southern landscapes fade into gray highways with my two damp suitcases shoved beneath my seat. I had exactly $300 left in my bank account and a burning knot of anger in my chest that kept me awake the entire trip. When I stepped off the bus, the bitter Chicago wind cut right through my thin graduation dress. I spent my first 2 weeks living in a cramped hostel, eating nothing but dollar menu noodles, and walking miles to job interviews because I could not afford train fare. I applied to every major financial institution in the city. They saw my Spelman degree and my perfect grades. But the corporate world in Chicago was a ruthless boy club. They looked at a young black woman from the South and assumed I was only good for fetching coffee or running spreadsheets for the senior partners. Finally, a mid-tier investment firm desperate for cheap analyst labor hired me. The pay was a joke and the office culture was absolute poison. I was the only black woman on the trading floor surrounded by arrogant men who wore expensive suits and inherited their positions through family connections. My direct manager was a man named Preston, who spent more time playing golf and networking than actually analyzing market data. I did not complain. I kept my head down and worked 100-hour weeks. I stayed in the office until 2 in the morning, building predictive financial models that no one else in the department had the stamina or the intellect to create. I was mapping out market inefficiencies and creating algorithms that could project real estate downturns with terrifying accuracy. I poured all my trauma, all my anger, and all my isolation into those numbers. I handed my completed portfolio model to Preston, expecting at least a performance bonus or a proper promotion. Instead, Preston took my 70-page report, slapped his own name on the cover page, and presented it to the executive board as his own brainchild. I found out when the firm sent out a mass email congratulating him on his brilliant new investment strategy. Most people would have run to human resources crying about stolen credit. I knew better. Human resources existed to protect the company, not the entry-level black girl who just moved to the city. I did not shed a single tear. I just sat at my cubicle staring at the congratulatory email and smiled. Preston made one fatal mistake. He did not actually understand the complex math behind the algorithm he stole. He was parading around a weapon he did not know how to fire. I waited until the firm's biggest institutional client, a massive pension fund holding billions in assets, scheduled a visit to hear the full pitch. I knew Preston was going to stumble through the technical presentation because he lacked the foundational knowledge to back up my projections. I did not wait for him to embarrass himself and ruin my hard work. I bypassed the entire corporate hierarchy and tracked down the lead portfolio manager for the pension fund at his favorite downtown steakhouse. I walked right up to his private table uninvited and slid a pristine printed folder next to his expensive meal. I told him exactly who I was and proved that Preston was a fraud. I walked him through the raw data, the risk variables, and the true potential of the algorithm that I built with my own 2 hands. The portfolio manager was a ruthless pragmatist who only cared about bottom-line results. He listened to me for 10 solid minutes and realized I was the smartest person in the room. I did not ask my firm for a promotion after that meeting. I asked the client for an exclusive contract to manage a dedicated portion of their funds directly. The pension fund completely pulled their capital from my former firm the very next day, causing an absolute bloodbath on the trading floor. Preston was fired before lunch, and the partners were left scrambling to understand how a 22-year-old analyst had just legally hijacked their biggest revenue stream. But I was already gone. I took the client seed capital and completely vanished from the traditional corporate grid. I used that initial massive influx of capital to quietly found Apex Holdings. I knew that if I put my name and face on the front door, the corporate world would constantly try to undermine me due to their inherent bias. More importantly, my father might catch wind of my success and try to sabotage me again. So I built a silent empire. I hired an older, distinguished white man with an impressive resume to act as the proxy CEO. He was the safe, traditional face of the company, attending the charity galas, giving interviews, and shaking hands with politicians, while I sat in the shadows of a dark glass office pulling every single string. I was the puppet master, making the final call on every acquisition, every hostile takeover, and every real estate buyout. My proxy board answered only to me, and they were paid handsomely to keep my identity a strict secret. While my proxy CEO played golf with bankers, I spent my days analyzing market trends and mercilessly acquiring undervalued commercial real estate. I bought abandoned warehouses and flipped them into luxury lofts. I purchased failing logistics companies, dismantled them, and sold their assets for triple the profit. Every single victory was a quiet vindication. I was accumulating wealth at a speed that terrified even my own board of directors. But I never once let my guard down. I lived in a modest penthouse, bought my clothes from unassuming luxury brands, and kept my digital footprint completely erased. Over the next few years, Apex Holdings grew into a private equity monster, silently swallowing up distressed properties and vulnerable businesses across the Midwest. Nobody knew that a Black woman in her 20s was the absolute ruler of this financial powerhouse. And absolutely no one in my toxic family back in Atlanta had any idea that the daughter they threw away in the rain was now holding enough capital to buy and sell their entire pathetic existence. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. I was 27 years old and officially a self-made millionaire. My bank accounts were overflowing, but I kept my personal life locked down tighter than a federal vault. I did not buy flashy cars or post luxury vacations. I lived quietly in a beautiful but discreet high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. But just because I was silent did not mean I was not watching. I kept my old burner phone active, specifically to monitor the Williams family on social media. Sitting in my plush leather armchair, sipping expensive black coffee, I would scroll through their Instagram feeds, watching the absolute circus they called a life. My father, Derek Sr., was bleeding his company dry to fund Valerie and her spoiled children. I watched a video of him proudly presenting her teenage son with a brand new Mercedes SUV for his high school graduation with a massive red bow on the hood. The caption read, "Nothing but the best for my boy." My bio mother Brenda was constantly posting pictures from expensive brunch spots funded entirely by the alimony she refused to jeopardize to save me. It was disgusting, but it fueled my ambition every single day. Then one Tuesday morning, a meeting invite crossed my desk that made my heart skip a beat and my lips curl into a vicious smile. My proxy board at Apex Holdings had scheduled a pitch meeting with a new Atlanta-based prop tech startup looking for seed funding. The founders listed on the dossier were none other than Derek Williams Jr. and Courtney Williams. DJ and his racist wife were flying all the way to Chicago to beg for venture capital from my firm. They had absolutely no idea that Apex Holdings was my creation. To them, it was just another faceless billion-dollar entity run by rich white men. They were coming to my house to beg for my money. I told my proxy CEO, Richard, exactly how I wanted this meeting handled. Richard was a brilliant, silver-haired corporate veteran who knew how to play the game perfectly and who answered directly to me. I instructed him to let them present their entire foolish idea before tearing it to shreds. I wanted them to feel important right up until the moment we cut the floor out from under them. When Thursday arrived, I did not sit in the boardroom. Instead, I stood in the adjoining observation room behind a wall of tinted one-way glass. I could see and hear everything perfectly, but to them it just looked like a sleek black architectural mirror. The heavy oak doors opened, and DJ walked in, wearing a suit that was too tight, accompanied by Courtney, who was carrying a designer briefcase and exuding that familiar, unearned confidence. They sat across the massive mahogany table from Richard, looking like two children playing business. DJ started the presentation. It was an app designed to disrupt commercial real estate leasing, but it was fundamentally flawed. His numbers were completely ungrounded, his market research was stolen from outdated public articles, and his risk assessment was literally non-existent. I stood in the dark sipping my water, watching my brother sweat under the fluorescent lights as he stumbled over basic financial terminology. He kept looking at Courtney for help, proving exactly how incompetent he really was. Then Courtney chimed in, trying to save the pitch. She aggressively flipped through a glossy brochure talking about inflated projections and claiming they would capture 50% of the southern market within 6 months. She flashed her bright fake smile, acting as if her sheer presence and her blonde hair were enough to close a multi-million-dollar deal. She even tried to flirt a little with Richard, using that Southern belle charm that usually worked on the old men back in Atlanta. That was when Richard leaned forward and executed my instructions flawlessly. "Mr. Williams." Richard began, his voice dropping to a freezing corporate monotone. "I have reviewed your technical specs and your financial models. Frankly, I am insulted that you brought this to my firm. Your market penetration strategy is entirely based on a fundamental misunderstanding of commercial zoning laws in the South. And Mrs. Williams," he turned his icy gaze to Courtney, "your projections are not just inflated, they are mathematically impossible. You are proposing a return on investment that defies basic economic principles. Did you actually run these numbers through a stress test? Or did you just pull them out of thin air to make the slide look pretty?" Courtney's face turned a patchy crimson red. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The white privilege she usually weaponized to get her way was completely useless against a superior white male executive who was systematically destroying her intelligence in a language she could not even argue against. DJ tried to salvage the situation, stammering about their family connections in Atlanta and how his father ran a successful logistics empire that could back up the venture. Richard cut him off immediately. "We do not invest in nepotism, Mr. Williams. We invest in competence. And your presentation today has demonstrated a severe lack of it. The code for your app is amateurish. The business model is a liability, and frankly, your lack of preparation is a waste of my time. This meeting is over. Please find your way out." DJ and Courtney hurriedly packed their glossy brochures into their designer bags, looking utterly humiliated. They avoided looking at Richard completely. They practically ran out of the boardroom, their tails tucked firmly between their legs. They had flown halfway across the country, spent thousands on flights and hotels just to be intellectually slaughtered and sent packing in under 20 minutes. Standing alone in the pitch-black observation room, I pressed my hand against the cold tinted glass and let out a soft, genuine laugh. They thought they were hotshots in Atlanta, but in my city, in my boardroom, they were nothing but corporate insects. I watched the heavy doors close behind them, and I smiled in the dark, knowing that this was only a tiny appetizer for the feast of ruin I was preparing for their future. 3 more years vanished into the relentless grind of building my empire. I was 30 years old and completely untouchable. My portfolio at Apex Holdings had tripled in value, and I was living a life that my family could not even fathom in their wildest dreams. But turning 30 was not just a personal milestone for me. It was the deadline. It was the exact day my grandfather, estate lawyer Elias Harrison, had told me to wait for, while I stood freezing in the rain outside my off-campus apartment 8 years ago. On the morning of my 30th birthday, I did not celebrate with a lavish party or an expensive vacation. I booked a private chartered flight to Atlanta, Georgia, under a corporate alias. I wore a simple black trench coat and oversized sunglasses, keeping my profile completely hidden as the hired car drove me through the familiar humid streets of my hometown. I arrived at Mr. Harrison Law Office, a quiet, heavy stone building tucked away in a prestigious and old money neighborhood. Elias Harrison was waiting for me in his lobby, looking much older but just as sharp and professional as he sounded on the phone all those years ago. He did not ask about my life or pry into my success. He simply shook my hand and led me down a long, dimly lit hallway into a secure records room. Standing in the corner of the room was a massive antique steel vault. He turned the heavy combination dial, and the metal door clicked open with a heavy thud echoing against the quiet walls. Mr. Harrison reached inside and pulled out a thick-bound stack of aged legal documents. He set them gently on the mahogany table between us and took a deep breath. "Your grandfather was a visionary man, Renee." He began, his voice thick with a profound respect. "He built his logistics company from absolutely nothing, and he understood the brutal reality of wealth preservation. But more importantly, he understood his own son. Your grandfather knew that your father was driven entirely by his own ego. He saw the arrogance, the need for constant validation, and the fatal flaw of prioritizing flashy appearances over generational stability. He knew that if he left his empire completely in your father's hands, Derek Sr. would eventually run the entire legacy into the ground just to fund a lifestyle he could not sustain. I sat perfectly still, listening as the ghost of my grandfather spoke through this lawyer. I knew my father was vain, but hearing that my grandfather had predicted his eventual ruin long before Valerie and her spoiled children ever entered the picture was deeply validating. Your father has spent the last 15 years strutting around Atlanta, parading himself as a real estate mogul and a logistics king. Mr. Harrison continued tapping the heavy stack of papers. But he is living an absolute lie. The 50-acre prime commercial land that his entire logistics company sits on right now, the land that gives his business its massive valuation, does not actually belong to him. My heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. I leaned forward, staring at the documents. "What do you mean it does not belong to him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have seen the tax assessments. The company pays the property taxes." "They pay the taxes because they occupy the land," Mr. Harrison corrected with a knowing smile. "But your grandfather never gave your father the deed. Decades before he passed away, your grandfather placed the entire 50-acre commercial plot into a highly complex, irrevocable generational trust. Your father was only granted what we call a life estate. He has the operational rights to use the land to run his trucks on it, and to operate his business from those buildings for the duration of his life. But he does not own the dirt underneath his feet. He cannot leverage it, he cannot borrow against it, and most importantly, he cannot ever sell it." The sheer magnitude of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who kicked me out of his house for not submitting to his new wife, the man who called me a failure and took away my car, was nothing more than a glorified tenant on his own fatherland. His entire net worth, his entire ego, was built on a foundation of sand that he did not even own. But a trust needs a beneficiary. I said, my mind racing through the corporate law I had mastered over the past 8 years. If my father does not own it, who does? Mr. Harrison pushed the heavy stack of documents across the table directly in front of me. He tapped a specific line on the top page where my grandfather's signature rested in faded black ink. "You do, Renee," he said quietly. "Your grandfather designated you as the primary controlling beneficiary of the trust. You hold exactly 51% of the voting power. The other 49% is locked in a blind escrow that defers to your final judgment. Your father thinks he is the master of his domain, but he is legally paralyzed. He cannot sell a single inch of that 50-acre property to anyone without your explicit legal signature on a quitclaim deed. You are the landlord, Renee. You hold the keys to the entire kingdom." I stared at my name typed on the aged legal parchment. A slow, chilling realization crept through my veins. My grandfather had not just left me money. He had handed me a loaded gun and told me to wait patiently until my enemies were standing right in front of the barrel. He knew my father would eventually try to cash out. He knew that ego and greed would eventually drive Derek Sr. to try and sell that incredibly valuable land to fund his lavish lifestyle or pay off his mounting debts. And when that day came, my father would suddenly slam face first into an impenetrable brick wall built by his own father and guarded by the daughter he threw away. The poetic justice of it all was so overwhelmingly perfect that I could not even formulate words. I had spent the last 8 years building a financial empire from the ground up, preparing to crush them with my own wealth. But my grandfather had already rigged the game in my favor long before I ever made my first million. He had given me the ultimate kill switch. Mr. Harrison handed me a custom pen. "I need you to sign these acknowledgement forms formally accepting your position as the controlling trustee," he said softly. "Your father has no idea about this clause. The trust was designed to remain completely invisible until the exact moment an attempted sale triggers a title search. When he tries to sell, he will find out that he is entirely at your mercy." I took the pen, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned pale. I signed my name on the dotted line, sealing my fate and sealing my family, inevitable doom. I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel any obligation to warn them. They had shown me zero mercy when I was a broke 22-year-old girl standing in the rain, and I was going to return that exact same energy when the time came. I thanked Mr. Harrison, left the office, and flew straight back to Chicago. I went right back to my dark glass office at Apex Holdings and got to work. I pulled up the commercial zoning maps for the Atlanta Logistics Corridor. The land my father occupied was perfectly positioned for massive corporate redevelopment. The tech boom was sweeping through the South, and industrial land in that specific zip code was becoming more valuable than gold. I knew it was only a matter of time before the offers started rolling in, and my father greed would take the bait. I started quietly using Apex Holdings to buy up the surrounding debt of my father's local competitors. I was setting a massive invisible chessboard, positioning my proxy companies to suffocate his market share and squeeze his profit margins. I wanted to apply just enough financial pressure to make him desperate. I wanted him to feel the heat of his own financial incompetence so that he would look at that 50-acre plot of land and see it as his only way out. I was going to make him desperately want to sell. I just had to sit back in my high-rise, sip my coffee, and wait for the trap to snap shut. The wait was exhilarating. Over the next 2 years, I orchestrated a masterclass in corporate warfare without ever leaving my Chicago penthouse. Using Apex Holdings as my impenetrable shield, I aggressively acquired the debt of every major logistics competitor in the greater Atlanta area. I bought out shipping routes. I snatched up commercial warehouse leases right out from under my father, and I manipulated supply chain pricing to create a slow, suffocating chokehold on his profit margins. My proxy board executed my commands flawlessly. We were a ghost in the machine, driving up freight costs and slowly draining the lifeblood out of his beloved company. I knew my father. I knew he would never admit defeat, and he would certainly never downsize his lifestyle to save his business. Instead of cutting back on Valerie and her expensive vacations or DJ and his ridiculous allowance, he started taking out massive high-interest loans just to keep up appearances. He was borrowing against a company that was bleeding cash, trying to outrun an invisible predator he did not even know existed. He thought the market was just going through a natural downturn. He had absolutely no idea that the market was actually his own daughter, tightening a financial noose around his neck. Exactly 10 years passed since the day he sent me that text message, disowning me before my college graduation. I was 32 years old now, sitting at the absolute pinnacle of my industry. My net worth was staggering, but my appetite for justice had only grown sharper. I still kept my old college burner phone charged and sitting in the top drawer of my desk. It was my only tether to the toxic wasteland I had left behind in the South. For a decade, that phone had remained completely silent. They never called to check if I was alive, if I was eating, or if I was safe. To them, I was just a ghost. A cautionary tale they probably whispered about at Thanksgiving dinners. But on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 10 years to the week of my graduation, that old cracked phone buzzed against the mahogany wood of my desk. The sudden vibration shattered the quiet hum of my office. I picked it up, my heart beating with a slow, rhythmic anticipation. The caller ID flashed a name I had not thought about in years. Aunt Vivian. She was the ringleader of my family flying monkeys, a woman who thrived on gossip and lived to enforce my father and his toxic patriarchal rules. I unlocked the screen and read the text message. It was a masterpiece of condescension and unearned arrogance. The message read, "Hello, Renee. I hope you have finally grown up and learned some respect. Your father has officially decided to retire. He is selling the logistics land to a major corporation from Chicago for $20 million. DJ is going to take over the remaining fleet, and Valerie is throwing a massive celebration dinner for the whole family this Friday in Buckhead. Your father is in a very generous mood. If you fly down here and publicly beg for his forgiveness, he might be willing to throw you a few $1,000s to help you out. Do not embarrass us again." I read the words $20 million and let out a laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my office. My father actually thought he had won. He thought he had successfully navigated his financial crisis by cashing out the 50-acre commercial plot for a massive payday. He was ready to sail off into the sunset on a yacht bought with money he believed was rightfully his. He was ready to crown DJ the new king of a hollowed-out logistics fleet while Valerie counted her millions. But the most hilarious part of Aunt Vivian's text message was the mention of a major corporation from Chicago. My father was so blinded by his own greed and desperation that he had failed to do basic due diligence on his buyer. The faceless Chicago corporation that had offered him $20 million for the land was a subsidiary entity entirely owned and operated by Apex Holdings. He was literally selling the land to me. The trap had presented itself flawlessly. My father was standing right on the giant red target, and all I had to do was pull the lever. He thought he was days away from a $20 million wire transfer. He thought he held all the cards and was graciously offering me a chance to grovel for crumbs at his banquet table. He had no idea that the title search company was already drafting the paperwork for the sale, and they were about to hit the ironclad generational trust my grandfather had set up. They were about to discover that the seller did not actually have the right to sell. I walked over to my floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling Chicago skyline. The storm clouds were rolling in dark and heavy over the lake. I thought about that 22-year-old girl crying in the rain with 2 wet suitcases. I thought about my biological mother telling me to swallow my pride and not mess up her alimony. I thought about DJ and Courtney mocking my natural hair and tossing my keys into the wet grass. They had demanded a failure, and I was about to give them an absolute nightmare. I did not respond to Aunt Vivian immediately. I let them marinate in their false sense of superiority for a few more hours. I called my proxy CEO Richard and instructed him to finalize all the acquisition documents on our end. I wanted the paperwork flawless, tight, and absolutely lethal. I told my legal team to prepare for an emergency title dispute in Georgia. The board thought this was just another routine commercial real estate takeover. They did not know this was a deeply personal execution. Later that evening, I picked up the burner phone and typed out a response to my nosy aunt. I kept it brief, playing perfectly into the pathetic, desperate persona they expected from me. I wrote Aunt Vivian, "Thank you for letting me know. I will be in Atlanta on Friday. Please text me the restaurant address. I am looking forward to seeing everyone again." I hit send and tossed the burner phone back into the drawer. The game was officially afoot. My family wanted me to fly down south and bend the knee for a $5,000 handout. They wanted to use me as a prop to highlight my father's immense success and benevolence. They wanted a dramatic reunion where the prodigal daughter returns in rags to worship at the altar of the Williams family wealth. I was going to give them a family reunion, all right, but it was going to be the absolute last one they ever had. Down in Atlanta, the celebration was already in full swing inside a private dining room at a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead. Derek Sr. sat at the head of a long mahogany table popping the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. Valerie was leaning against his shoulder wearing a brand new diamond necklace, bought on credit while they all waited for the $20 million wire transfer. They thought they had crossed the finish line. They thought all their financial sins were about to be washed away by a faceless Chicago corporation. Across the table, DJ was laughing loudly, stuffing his face with prime rib. Sitting next to him was Courtney, his white wife, who was acting as the commercial real estate broker for this massive transaction. Courtney was practically vibrating with greed. She had her phone hidden under the table, already browsing for a new Porsche and mentally spending the $600,000 commission she believed was absolutely guaranteed. She was playing the part of the successful power broker, soaking up the praise from my father, who kept raising his glass to toast her brilliant business acumen. They were taking a victory lap on a track they did not even own. And that premature celebration was about to crash into a catastrophic brick wall. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, Courtney's phone started ringing. The caller ID showed the lead attorney from the title search company that was overseeing the escrow process. Courtney answered the call with a smug, confident smile, fully expecting a routine update on the closing timeline. She put the phone to her ear, ready to hear that the funds were cleared. Instead, the color instantly drained from her face the moment the attorney started speaking. Her smug smile collapsed into an expression of sheer terror. "Mrs. Williams?" The attorney said, his voice tight with professional panic filtering through the receiver. "We have a major problem with the property title. There is a severe cloud on the deed. The sale to Apex Holdings cannot proceed under any circumstances." Courtney stood up abruptly, her heavy wooden chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden noise drew the attention of the entire table. DJ stopped chewing. Valerie lowered her champagne glass. "What do you mean, a cloud?" Courtney demanded, her voice cracking. "Derek Sr. owns that land free and clear. We provided all the corporate documents. This is a straightforward commercial sale." "No, he does not." The title attorney corrected, firmly refusing to be intimidated by her tone. Our deep dive into the county records uncovered a hidden, irrevocable generational trust tied directly to the deed. Derek Williams Sr. only holds a life estate. He has operational rights to run his business on the property, but he does not possess the legal authority to sell the underlying 50 acres. The property is actually controlled by a primary beneficiary who holds 51% of the voting power. Courtney's hand started shaking so badly she almost dropped the device. Derek Sr. slammed his expensive champagne glass down on the table, spilling wine everywhere. He snatched the phone right out of her hand and put it on speaker mode so everyone could hear. "This is Derek Sr.," he barked, trying to use his booming voice to control reality. "What kind of incompetence is this? My father left me this logistics company. I am the absolute owner. You need to fix this paperwork glitch immediately, or I am suing your entire firm for gross negligence." "Mr. Williams, I assure you our search is 100% accurate," the attorney replied, his tone turning ice cold. "Your father established a trust that remained entirely dormant until triggered by an attempted sale. You do not own the dirt under your warehouses. You cannot sell this land to Apex Holdings or anyone else. The $20 million transaction is completely frozen." The private dining room went dead silent. The luxurious steakhouse dinner suddenly felt like a funeral. The $20 million dream, the escape hatch for all his embezzled funds and bad loans, was evaporating right before their eyes. Valerie let out a sharp, dramatic gasp, clutching her designer purse to her chest. DJ looked completely lost, staring blankly at his father. "How do we fix this?" Courtney asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Her $600,000 commission was slipping through her fingers and she was panicking. "There has to be a legal workaround or a loophole we can exploit." "There is only one way," the attorney said. "We need the primary beneficiary of the generational trust to sign a quit-claim deed. They must officially and legally relinquish their controlling 51% interest in the property. Without that specific signature, Apex Holdings will walk away, and the deal collapses permanently." Derek Sr. breathed heavily, his chest heaving with rising anger. Who is the beneficiary? He growled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Who do I need to pay off to get this signature right now? The attorney paused. You could hear the shuffling of papers through the speakerphone. The primary beneficiary is your daughter, Mr. Williams, the attorney said clearly. Renee Williams. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and completely devastating. The sheer terror that must have washed over my father's face in that moment was something I would have paid millions to witness in person. The daughter he threw away in the rain, the daughter he disowned over text message, the daughter he thought was a broke and pathetic failure, was the only person on earth who could save him from total financial ruin. The $20 million exit strategy he desperately needed to cover his tracks and fund his lavish lifestyle was locked behind a steel door, and I was the one holding the only key. Courtney was hyperventilating, her hands pressed against her face. DJ was staring at the wall in pure disbelief, unable to comprehend that his outcast sister was now his landlord. Valerie was likely calculating how fast she could pack her bags and leave my father if the money fell through completely. You have to call her, Courtney shrieked, breaking the silence and shattering the illusion of their perfect family. Call her right now. We cannot lose this deal. Apex Holdings is a massive corporation, and they are not going to wait around for us to resolve your stupid family drama. Derek Sr. just stared at his phone, the crushing weight of his own arrogance breaking his spirit. He had spent the last 10 years pretending I did not exist. He had erased me from his life to protect his fragile ego. And now his entire survival, his reputation and his freedom depended entirely on my mercy. He needed a signature from the exact woman he tried to destroy. The trap had just snapped shut perfectly around his neck. Derek Sr. did not call me to apologize. He did not call to explain the situation or to try and mend a decade of absolute silence. His ego was too massive to allow him to admit defeat over the phone. Instead, my old burner phone buzzed on my desk in Chicago later that evening. I picked it up and read the message. It was completely devoid of any warmth or familial affection. It was just a cold, arrogant demand. Send me your mailing address. I am sending a legal paper regarding your grandfather's old trust. Sign it and send it back immediately. In exchange, I will wire you $5,000 to help you out. Do not complicate this. I stared at the glowing screen and let out a soft laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my office. $5,000. He was trying to buy the controlling rights to a $20 million commercial property for a pathetic $5,000. He still thought I was that desperate 22-year-old girl standing in the freezing rain with 2 wet suitcases. He thought he could wave a few $1,000s in my face and I would blindly sign whatever documents his lawyers drafted just to pay my rent. He was banking entirely on my supposed poverty to blind me to the reality of the transaction. He thought I was stupid. I did not reply immediately. I let him sweat for a full 24 hours. I knew his lawyers were panicking behind closed doors. I knew Courtney was probably pacing holes into her expensive carpets, worrying about her evaporating commission. The silence was my first weapon, and I yielded it with surgical precision. I went about my day, managing my multi-million-dollar portfolio, approving hostile takeovers, and expanding my private equity empire, all while my biological father was likely staring at his phone, begging the universe for a reply. When I finally decided to respond, I did not argue. I did not ask questions about the property or the trust. I kept my message short and incredibly specific. If you want my signature on anything, you will bring the document to me in person. I am flying into Atlanta tomorrow. Dinner tomorrow night. Bring the paperwork. The response from my father was almost instantaneous. He was desperate but still trying to maintain the illusion of control. Fine, I will send the restaurant address. Do not be late. The trap was moving seamlessly into its next phase. I called my proxy board at Apex Holdings and instructed them to completely stall all communication with my father, real estate broker. I wanted Courtney to feel the pressure mounting by the hour. I wanted them all to walk into that dinner knowing that if they did not get my signature that night, their entire financial future would collapse into dust. The desperation would make them sloppy and eager to agree to whatever terms I dictated. I packed my bags for the flight to Atlanta, but I made very deliberate choices about what to bring. I did not pack my tailored designer suits or my expensive jewelry. I left my Cartier watch locked in the safe at home. I left the thousands of dollars in custom luxury clothing hanging in my closet. If I walked into that restaurant looking like the CEO of a private equity firm, my father would immediately sense a massive threat. His ego would go into overdrive, and he would realize the power dynamic had completely shifted. I needed him to believe his own false narrative. I needed him to look at me and see a struggling millennial who desperately needed his $5,000 handout to survive. I went to a local mall and bought a plain off-the-rack suit from Zara. It was modest, unremarkable, and blended in perfectly with the image of a low-level office worker. I pulled my natural hair back into a simple professional bun devoid of any expensive styling. I wore basic flat shoes and carried a mid-tier handbag that I had kept from my early struggling days in Chicago. Looking in the mirror before I left for the airport, I looked exactly like a mid-level corporate employee who was just scraping by month to month. I looked like easy prey. I flew first class to Atlanta, drinking champagne and reviewing the final acquisition documents on my encrypted tablet. The flight attendants treated me with the utmost respect, unaware that the wealthy woman in seat 1A was dressed in cheap retail clothing as part of a psychological war against her own family. When we landed, I made sure my hired private driver dropped me off a full block away from the restaurant. I walked the rest of the way, stepping into the thick, humid Georgia evening air, letting the sticky heat settle over my cheap suit. The restaurant my father had chosen was a highly exclusive, upscale soul food establishment in the heart of Buckhead. It was the exact kind of place where the local Atlanta elite went to see and be seen. It was intentionally designed to intimidate me. He wanted to surround me with wealth and luxury, to remind me of the comfortable lifestyle I had forfeited when I refused to bend the knee to his new wife Valerie a decade ago. He wanted me to feel small, out of place, and desperate to get back into his good graces. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and gave my name to the hostess. As she led me through the dimly lit dining room filled with the sounds of clinking crystal glasses and quiet jazz music, I spotted them immediately. They had reserved a large booth right in the center of the room, commanding attention. My entire toxic family was waiting for me. Derek Sr. sat at the head of the table looking impatient and stressed. Valerie was sitting next to him wearing far too much jewelry and sipping a dry martini. My biological mother Brenda was there, sitting nervously on the edge of her seat, likely terrified that I would ruin her alimony payments again. My brother DJ and his white wife Courtney looked like they were ready to jump out of their skin with anticipation. And rounding out the table were my three aunts Vivian, Shirley, and Roxanne. The flying monkeys had been assembled to guilt-trip me into submission just like they always did. I took a deep breath, letting the persona of the struggling, defeated daughter settle over my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I walked up to the table, keeping my expression carefully neutral. The moment they saw me, their eyes immediately swept over my plain Zara suit, my basic flat shoes, and my outdated handbag. I saw Courtney smirk, leaning over to whisper something to DJ. I saw my father visibly relax his shoulders, letting out a breath he had probably been holding all day. The deception was working perfectly. They looked at me and saw exactly what they wanted to see. They thought I was a desperate, hungry animal coming to the slaughter, but I was the one holding the knife. I stood at the edge of the oversized leather booth, waiting for someone to acknowledge my presence. Nobody stood up to greet me. Nobody offered a hug. My father, Derek Sr., just pointed a thick finger at the only empty chair left at the far end of the table, right next to my biological mother, Brenda. I slid into the seat, placing my cheap handbag carefully on the floor. The air around the table was thick with expensive cologne and artificial Southern hospitality. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence. My Aunt Vivian sneered, taking a sip of her dark rum. I see the Midwest has not done much for your sense of style, Renee. I kept my face completely blank, letting her insult slide right off my back. I did not come here to argue about my clothes. I came here to dismantle an empire. Before I could even reach for the linen napkin, Courtney leaned across the table, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her diamond engagement ring catching the ambient light of the restaurant. "Order whatever you want, sweetie," Courtney said, her voice dripping with that familiar, condescending pity she reserved for black women she felt superior to. "DJ is picking up the tab tonight. We know you probably do not eat at places like this very often, so go ahead and treat yourself to a nice steak. Maybe even get an appetizer." DJ puffed out his chest, trying to look like a generous benefactor instead of a grown man who still lived off his father allowance. "Yeah, Renee, do not worry about the prices," he added loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Dad told us you have been struggling up there in Chicago. We are happy to help out the less fortunate members of the family." I looked down at the menu, fighting the urge to laugh in their faces. My personal assistant spent more on her weekly grocery runs than what this entire dinner was going to cost, but I played my part flawlessly. I ordered the cheapest chicken dish on the menu and asked for a glass of tap water. Courtney smirked at DJ, exchanging a knowing glance that screamed poverty. Valerie adjusted her designer scarf and let out a dramatic sigh, as if my order had personally offended her refined palate. "I raised my children to have class," Valerie muttered under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to catch the insult. Some people just never learn how to behave in polite society regardless of how much charity they receive. Derek Sr. did not even bother pretending to care about my well-being. He did not ask how my flight was. He did not ask if I was healthy or happy. He just reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the center of the table right next to the breadbasket. "Let us skip the small talk," my father barked, his eyes narrowing. "You know why you are here. I have a business transaction closing tomorrow morning, and my lawyers discovered a ridiculous clerical error left behind by your grandfather. It is a technicality, nothing more. I need you to sign this quitclaim deed officially removing your name from the old trust documents so we can proceed with the sale." He snapped his fingers at a passing waiter, ordering a round of expensive whiskey for himself and DJ. When the waiter walked away, he turned his cold gaze back to me. "I brought a certified notary from my office who is waiting at the bar. Sign the paper, and I will write you a check for $5,000 right now. You can take the money, fly back to your little apartment, and we can all move on with our lives." I stared at the manila envelope resting on the white tablecloth. I did not reach for it. My hesitation was the signal the flying monkeys were waiting for. The aunts descended on me like vultures scenting blood. "You better pick up that pen, girl," Aunt Shirley hissed, leaning across the table and pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Your father is being more than generous, offering you $5,000. You have not spoken to this family in 10 years, and he is still willing to bless you with a handout. You owe him this signature for everything he provided for you when you were a child." Aunt Roxanne chimed in right on cue, shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment. "Family is family, Renee. You do not stand in the way of your father's business. He has worked his entire life to build this company, and you have no right to hold up his retirement over some ancient piece of paper. $5,000 is a massive blessing for a single woman with no prospects. You should be on your knees thanking God and this man for his charity." My biological mother, Brenda, finally spoke up, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Please, Renee," she whispered, grabbing my arm under the table. "Just sign the paper. Do not ruin this for us. Your father promised to pay off my mortgage if this deal goes through. You know I cannot afford to lose my house. Do not be selfish." I looked at Brenda, feeling absolutely nothing for her. She was still the exact same coward she was a decade ago, willing to sell her daughter out for a paid-off mortgage and an alimony check. She had not changed, and neither had anyone else at this table. They were all feeding off my father's wealth, blindly worshipping his ego because it funded their comfortable lives. "You are being awfully quiet," Courtney noted, swirling her wine glass. "I hope you are not thinking about causing a scene, Renee." Derek Sr. has a lot of important connections in this city. You do not want to make an enemy out of him. He could ruin whatever little career you have managed to scrape together in Chicago. Just take the money and be grateful. I let their toxic words wash over me, absorbing every single insult and every single threat. They were painting themselves into a corner, and they did not even realize it. They were building a narrative where I was powerless, pathetic, and desperate for their approval. They thought the $5,000 was an irresistible temptation. They truly believed that $20 million transaction was theirs by divine right, and I was just an annoying speed bump on their road to massive wealth. I finally moved my hands, resting them on the edge of the table. I looked directly into my father's eyes. He was glaring at me, expecting me to crumble under the weight of the family expectations. He expected me to snatch the pen and sign my name just to escape the relentless pressure. I looked at the manila envelope and then back at him. I told him that if my grandfather put my name on a generational trust, protecting a 50-acre commercial property right in the middle of the Atlanta logistics corridor, a simple clerical error does not require a quitclaim deed. I told him it requires a buyout, and I highly doubt $5,000 is the fair market value of my signature. The table went completely still. Aunt Vivian choked on her rum. DJ stopped chewing his bread. Derek's senior face darkened, the veins in his neck beginning to bulge against his silk collar. I asked him what made him think the land was only worth a $5,000 signature. The sheer audacity of my response sent a shockwave through the booth. Courtney let out a sharp gasp. Brenda squeezed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. I had just challenged the king on his own throne, and the air in the restaurant suddenly felt dangerously thin. My father stared at me, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. He leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the table, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that was meant to strike fear directly into my soul. "You do not know what you are talking about, Renee," he said, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. "This is grown folks' business. You are way out of your depth." He reached out and roughly grabbed the manila envelope. His thick fingers ripped open the top flap, and he pulled out the heavy stack of legal documents. It was the quitclaim deed, the exact piece of paper his high-priced lawyers had drafted to erase my 51% controlling interest in the generational trust. He slid the crisp white pages across the pristine tablecloth, stopping them directly in front of my chest. Then he reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out an expensive gold-plated pen, and slammed it down right on top of the signature line. "Sign it!" He ordered, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "Do not make a scene in this restaurant. You are already on thin ice sitting at this table. Sign the paper, take your little check, and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of in Chicago." The tension around the booth was suffocating. Valerie smirked, taking a long, slow sip of her martini, completely convinced that her husband had just put me back in my designated place. Courtney muttered something under her breath about me being ungrateful and stubborn. My 3 aunts were literally holding their breath, waiting for me to bow my head, pick up the pen, and obey the patriarch of the Williams family just like I was supposed to do. My biological mother, Brenda, refused to even look at me, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on her empty plate. Just then, a waiter approached our booth, moving quietly so as not to interrupt the tense family dynamic. He set down a fresh, heavy crystal glass of dark Cabernet Sauvignon that DJ had ordered for the table right next to my right hand. It was an expensive vintage, easily $200 a bottle. The dark red liquid caught the dim light of the crystal chandeliers hanging above us. I looked down at the crisp, white legal document sitting on the table. That stack of paper represented the absolute key to a $20 million transaction. It represented my father's desperate escape from his massive hidden debts. It represented Courtney evaporating $600,000 real estate commission. It represented the arrogant assumption that they could treat me like garbage for a decade and then summon me like a dog to save their crumbling empire. I slowly reached out my right hand. My father let out a quiet scoff of victory, believing I was reaching for the gold-plated pen to sign away my birthright. The flying monkeys around the table began to relax their shoulders, ready to celebrate their triumphant manipulation. But I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I wrapped my fingers firmly around the stem of the heavy crystal wine glass. I lifted the expensive Cabernet off the table, bringing the dark red liquid up to chest level. I looked directly across the table into my father's eyes. The anger in his gaze was absolute, but deep down behind the fury, there was a sudden flicker of pure confusion. He did not understand why I was not cowering in fear. He did not understand why my hand was perfectly steady. I let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. It was a smile born from 10 years of surviving the freezing Chicago winters, 10 years of building a private equity empire in the shadows, and 10 years of waiting for this exact moment. Then, with a simple, effortless flick of my wrist, I tilted the crystal glass forward. The dark purple Cabernet poured out in a thick, heavy waterfall. It hit the center of the quitclaim deed, splashing violently across the signature line and soaking the thick parchment paper instantly. The red wine bled rapidly across the legal text, turning the entire multi-million-dollar document into a soggy, ruined mess of purple and black ink. The liquid ran off the edges of the paper, pooling onto the immaculate white tablecloth and spreading like a massive bruise right in front of my father. The entire table erupted in absolute unprecedented chaos. Valerie shrieked loudly, jumping back and pulling her designer dress away from the spreading purple stain. Courtney leaped up from the booth, knocking over her own water glass, in pure, unadulterated shock, her mouth hanging open as she watched her commission literally drown in Cabernet. DJ dropped his fork onto his plate, the clatter ringing out sharply as he stared at the ruined paperwork like he had just seen a ghost. Aunt Vivian, Aunt Shirley, and Aunt Roxanne all gasped simultaneously, covering their mouths in horror. My biological mother Brenda buried her face in her hands, letting out a muffled sob of absolute terror because she knew the alimony payments she relied on were now in serious jeopardy. Courtney leaned over the table, grabbing a handful of cloth napkins and frantically trying to dab the wine off the legal documents. She was wiping at the paper with such desperate panic that she only ended up smearing the black ink further into the purple stains, completely destroying any hope of salvaging the signature line. "My commission," she kept muttering under her breath, her eyes wide and frantic. "You cannot do this. You are ruining my commission." The manager of the restaurant, a tall man in a tailored suit, had started walking toward our table when he heard Valerie shriek, but as he got closer, he stopped in his tracks. The tension radiating from our booth was so thick and dangerous that he immediately turned around and walked back to the host stand, deciding it was safer to let us destroy each other without corporate interference. I set the empty crystal glass gently back onto the table right next to the soaking wet purple documents. The soft clink of the glass against the wood cut through the sudden silence of the dining room as nearby tables turned to stare at the commotion. I looked at the ruined paperwork, and then I looked back at my father. His face had turned a shade of purple that almost perfectly matched the spilled wine. The vein in his forehead was pulsing dangerously, and his fists were clenched so tightly on the table that his knuckles were bone white. "Oops," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady, echoing clearly across the booth. My hand slipped. I smoothly picked up a crisp white cloth napkin from my lap and casually dabbed a single drop of wine off my index finger. I kept my eyes locked on his, watching the king of the Williams family realize that he had absolutely no power over me anymore. And by the way, I continued dropping the napkin onto the ruined papers. "If you want me to sign away my controlling 51% interest in a generational trust that protects a 50-acre commercial property right in the middle of the Atlanta logistics corridor, the price is not $5,000. The sheer audacity of my action paralyzed every single person at that table. Nobody had ever disrespected Derek Sr. in public. Nobody had ever dared to look him in the eye and destroy a legal document that stood between him and his financial salvation. Courtney was hyperventilating, her eyes darting frantically between the purple-stained papers and my calm face. She finally realized that the struggling broke millennial in the cheap Zara suit was actually holding the absolute power of a god over their entire wealthy existence. DJ tried to act tough, standing up from the booth and pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "You are crazy!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "You just ruined the entire deal, you stupid girl. Dad is going to destroy you for this." I did not even flinch. I just sat there leaning back against the leather booth, completely unbothered by his pathetic display of aggression. "I did not ruin the deal, DJ," I corrected him softly. "I simply reset the negotiation terms. You all invited me to this dinner thinking you were going to bully a vulnerable woman into saving your sinking ship. You thought you could offer me pennies while you walked away with $20 million from a faceless Chicago corporation." I watched the realization slowly wash over my father's face. He finally understood that I knew everything. I knew about the buyer, I knew about the sale price, I knew about his lack of ownership, and I knew about the immense leverage I held over his entire life. The satisfaction running through my veins was entirely intoxicating. This was the moment I had meticulously planned for a decade. The king was completely stripped of his crown. The golden child was exposed as powerless and incompetent. The white savior sister-in-law was having a panic attack over her lost money, and the flying monkey aunts were far too terrified to speak a single word of their usual toxic scripture. The silence that followed my declaration did not last long. It shattered the moment my father finally processed the reality of what I had just done. Derek Sr. stood up so fast that his heavy wooden chair crashed backwards onto the polished restaurant floor. The loud bang echoed through the dining room, but he did not care. His massive frame loomed over the table, and the thick veins in his neck were bulging against his expensive silk collar. He slammed both of his fists onto the table, making the remaining silverware rattle and the ruined wine-soaked documents stick to his skin. "You are an absolute monster," he roared, his voice tearing through the upscale restaurant and silencing every other patron in the room. "You think you can walk in here after 10 years and hold my company hostage? You are trying to extort your own father for a piece of land that I built with my own 2 hands. I will have you arrested for this, you ungrateful little thief. I will call my lawyers right now, and we will bury you so deep in litigation you will never see the sun again." I did not flinch. I simply sat in the booth and looked up at him, watching the panic completely consume his fake corporate armor. He was putting on a loud, terrifying performance to regain control of the room, but I could see the absolute terror swimming in the back of his eyes. He knew he had no legal ground to stand on, and screaming at me was the only weapon he had left. Before I could even formulate a response to his pathetic threats, I felt a sharp, painful grip on my left forearm. My biological mother Brenda had leaned across the leather seat and dug her manicured acrylic nails directly into my skin. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure selfish panic. All her previous nervous energy had completely evaporated, replaced by a vicious primal greed that made my stomach turn. "Are you completely out of your mind, Renee?" she hissed, her voice a frantic, desperate whisper that was meant only for me. "What is wrong with you? Your father promised to pay off the remaining balance of my mortgage the minute this $20 million sale goes through. If you ruin this deal, I will lose my house. I am swimming in credit card debt, and I need that money to survive. Stop acting like a selfish, spoiled brat and fix this right now. You are ruining my life just to prove a point." I slowly turned my head and looked down at her fingers digging into my arm. This was the exact same woman who told me to swallow my pride and apologize to the man who disowned me 10 years ago, just to protect her alimony checks. A decade had passed, and she had not evolved or grown one single bit. She was still completely willing to sacrifice her own daughter on the altar of her financial comfort. I reached over with my right hand and firmly gripped her wrist. I did not yell or raise my voice. I just applied enough pressure to her bones to make her gasp and release her grip. I coldly shoved her hand away from my body as if she were a diseased insect that had landed on my cheap Zara suit. "Do not ever touch me again, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing sub-zero whisper that made her physically recoil into the corner of the booth. Your mortgage is not my problem. Your credit card debt is not my problem. You chose a man who abuses you financially over a daughter who loved you, and now you get to live with the exact consequences of that terrible investment. Do not speak to me for the rest of this evening unless you are spoken to." Brenda's mouth opened and closed silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. The flying monkey ants, Vivian, Shirley, and Roxanne, were staring at me in absolute horror, unable to comprehend how the timid girl they used to bully had transformed into this ruthless, freezing entity. They had absolutely no script for this scenario. Their toxic guilt trips were completely useless against someone who felt absolutely zero guilt. I turned my attention back to the men at the table. DJ was still standing awkwardly next to his father, trying to look tough, but failing miserably. Derek Sr. was breathing heavily, glaring at me with a hatred so pure it was almost suffocating. Courtney was frantically texting someone under the table, probably her managing broker trying to figure out how to save her massive commission. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table right next to the puddle of spilled wine. I made sure to maintain direct, unblinking eye contact with my father as I delivered the fatal legal blow. "You can threaten to call your lawyers all you want," I said, keeping my tone conversational and completely devoid of any emotion. "But we both know exactly what your high-priced legal team is going to tell you. They are going to tell you that the generational trust my grandfather established is absolutely ironclad. They are going to tell you that I am the legally designated primary beneficiary holding 51% of the controlling interest. And most importantly, they are going to tell you that if you try to fight me on this, I have the power to tie this entire property up in the Fulton County Probate Court for the next 7 years." The blood drained completely from DJ's face. 7 years, he repeated weakly, realizing that his entire inheritance was currently dangling over a fiery cliff. "Yes, 7 years. DJ, I confirm, not looking away from my father. I have the resources to keep this in litigation until you are both completely bankrupt. And we both know the buyer is not going to wait 7 years for you to clear the title. The faceless Chicago corporation that offered you $20 million will walk away by the end of the week if they do not have a clean deed. They will take their capital and invest it somewhere else, leaving you with a crumbling logistics fleet, a mountain of high-interest debt, and a 50-acre dirt lot that you cannot sell to anyone." I watched the reality of his impending doom settle heavily over my father's broad shoulders. He slowly sank back into his heavy wooden chair, all the air deflating from his chest. The booming, loud patriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a trapped, desperate old man who was rapidly running out of time. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew the corporate buyers in Chicago had strict deadlines and zero patience for messy Southern family drama. Valerie let out a quiet whimper, realizing that her future shopping sprees and luxury vacations were currently burning to ash on the dining room table. Courtney finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with frantic pleading. The entire table had been completely neutralized by basic legal facts and ruthless corporate strategy. "You need me, Derek," I said, refusing to call him Dad ever again. "You need my signature to save your sinking ship. You thought you could summon me down here and buy my birthright with a pathetic $5,000 check. You insulted my intelligence and you disrespected my grandfather's legacy. So here is the new reality. The buyer will not wait and you are completely out of options." I leaned back into the booth, smoothing out the lapels of my cheap suit. The restaurant around us was completely silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked at my father, watching him squirm in his own personalized hell. "Now," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Give me a real number." The silence hanging over the dining room was abruptly broken by the sound of Courtney sliding out of the leather booth. She nearly tripped over her expensive heels in her haste to reach my side of the table. Her face was a desperate mask of fake sisterly affection, completely abandoning the condescending smirk she had worn just 10 minutes prior. "Renee, please," Courtney whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "Let us step into the hallway for just a minute, just us girls. We can figure this out without all the yelling." I looked at her frantic eyes and knew exactly what she was trying to do. Her $600,000 real estate commission was evaporating, and she was willing to play the white savior to secure her bag. I slowly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my cheap Zara suit, and followed her out of the crowded dining area into the quiet, opulent hallway near the private restrooms. The moment the heavy wooden doors closed behind us, Courtney dropped the sweet Southern Belle routine and went straight to business. "Look, Renee, I know your dad can be a lot to handle," she said nervously, checking over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "But you are destroying my livelihood right now. I have spent months putting this deal together with Apex Holdings. If you tank this sale, my managing broker will fire me." I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the velvet wallpaper. "That sounds like a personal problem, Courtney. I told you to give me a real number." Courtney dug into her designer purse and pulled out a small checkbook. "Okay, look, I am willing to do this out of my own pocket," she said, speaking in rushed, hushed tones. "We are sisters, right? Family has to stick together. I will write you a personal check for $50,000 right here, right now, under the table. Tax-free. You can take the money. Start a nice little life for yourself in Chicago and leave this messy Atlanta business behind. 50,000 is a lot of money for a girl in your position, Renee." I stared at her, fighting the urge to burst out laughing. She truly believed $50,000 was enough to make me surrender a property worth tens of millions. She was trying to exploit my supposed poverty while playing the generous white benefactor, saving the poor black girl from her own family drama. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old burner phone. I kept my eyes on Courtney while my thumb swiped across the screen. "Georgia is a one-party consent state when it comes to recording conversations. You do not need to inform the other person that you are taping them as long as you are actively participating in the dialogue." I silently tapped the bright red record button on the voice memo app and slipped the phone back into my pocket, leaving the microphone perfectly exposed. $50,000 is an insult, Courtney," I said, raising my voice just enough so it would carry back toward the dining room doors. "My grandfather left me controlling interest of a 50-acre commercial empire. If Derek Sr. wants me to sign away my legacy, he needs to come out here and tell me exactly why he is so desperate to sell." The heavy wooden doors burst open before Courtney could even respond. Derek Sr. stormed into the hallway, his chest heaving, his face a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had been listening, and his fragile ego could not handle the fact that his daughter-in-law was trying to negotiate a backdoor deal on his behalf. "What the hell are you doing, Courtney?" he barked, shoving her aside so violently she stumbled against the wall. "Do not offer her a single dime of your money. I am the head of this family, and I handle my own business." I looked at him, my phone quietly recording every single breath he took. "You are not handling anything, Derek," I said, pushing his buttons with surgical precision. "You are sweating through your silk shirt and begging me for a signature. A real logistics king does not panic over a delayed closing. A real millionaire does not try to buy his daughter off with $5,000. You are desperate. Why are you so desperate to sell to this Chicago corporation?" My father's face twisted into something entirely demonic. His pride was his absolute biggest weakness, and I was stomping all over it. He could not stand being questioned by the daughter he deemed a failure. He needed to prove he was the smartest man in the room, even if it meant exposing his own dirty secrets. "You think you are so smart," he spat, stepping closer to me until I could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. "You think you know how the real world works because you read a few legal documents. You have no idea what is at stake here, you arrogant little brat." "Then enlighten me," I challenged, keeping my tone freezing cold. "Why Apex Holdings? Why the rush?" "Because the Internal Revenue Service is currently auditing my entire corporate fleet," he screamed, his voice echoing off the hallway walls. His ego completely took over, vomiting the truth out into the open. "The IRS is crawling all over my books, Renee. I have been siphoning corporate funds for the last 4 years to keep Valerie happy. I bought her sons 2 luxury boats and a beach condo down in Florida using company money. The logistics fleet is bleeding cash, and the auditors are weeks away from finding the missing capital." Courtney gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth in sheer horror. She had no idea the family business was built on federal tax fraud. If I do not close this $20 million sale with Apex Holdings by the end of the week, I am going to federal prison. Derek Sr. continued ranting violently, unaware that he was signing his own death warrant into my hidden microphone. I need that Chicago money to wipe the corporate books clean and pay off the IRS before the federal agents freeze my accounts. That is why I am selling. That is why you are going to sign that quit-claim deed tonight. You are going to save my company, and you are going to do it because I am your father. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch out in the luxurious hallway. My phone had just captured a crystal-clear audio confession of massive corporate embezzlement, tax evasion, and wire fraud directly from the CEO of Williams Logistics. My grandfather's trust was the bait, but my father's own massive ego was the trap that finally broke his neck. I looked at his red, sweating face, and I felt a profound sense of closure. The man who threw me away was standing right in front of me, handing me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy his entire existence. I let out a long, slow breath, pretending to look defeated. I dropped my shoulders, letting the defiant posture melt away into a fake mask of terrified submission. I needed him to believe he had won the argument. I needed him to feel like the powerful patriarch who had just successfully bullied his daughter into compliance. "Fine," I whispered, keeping my voice low and defeated. "You win, Derek. I will sign the quitclaim deed." Courtney let out a massive sigh of relief, leaning against the wall. My father smirked, his chest puffing out again as the arrogant king reclaimed his imaginary throne. "I knew you would finally see reason," he scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. "But I am not signing a wine-soaked piece of paper in a soul food restaurant," I added quickly. "If you want my signature, you will have your lawyers print a fresh document. I will meet you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at your attorney office. I will sign it in front of the legal representatives from Apex Holdings. And I am keeping Courtney $50,000 offer." My father rolled his eyes, clearly disgusted but desperate enough to agree. "Fine. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Do not be late, Renee. And do not wear that cheap suit. Try to look like you belong to this family for once." He turned around and marched back into the dining room, leaving Courtney and me in the hallway. I reached into my pocket and quietly stopped the voice recording, saving the file to my secure cloud server. The game of cat and mouse was officially over. The slaughter was scheduled for tomorrow morning. I stepped back into the dining room just long enough to grab my cheap handbag from the edge of the leather booth. The rest of the family was sitting in stunned silence, staring at my father, who had just returned to his seat, looking like a triumphant conqueror who had successfully crushed a peasant rebellion. Valerie was already pulling out her compact mirror to fix her lipstick completely, assured that her luxury lifestyle had been rescued by her husband, terrifying authority. Brenda. My biological mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief and flagged down a waiter to order another round of expensive drinks. None of them even bothered to look at me as I walked away. To them, I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience that had been successfully swatted aside. I walked out of the restaurant and into the warm Atlanta night, feeling the heavy, humid air wrap around me. I did not look back. My private driver was waiting exactly 1 block away, blending perfectly into the dark shadows of the street, just as I had instructed. I climbed into the back of the black SUV and told him to take me to the St. Regis Hotel. I had booked the top-floor penthouse suite under a corporate alias, keeping my presence in the city entirely off the radar. The moment the heavy doors of my suite clicked shut behind me, I peeled off the cheap Zara suit and tossed it directly into the trash can. I washed the heavy humidity and the smell of that toxic restaurant off my skin, standing under the hot rainfall shower until the tension in my muscles finally relaxed. I wrapped myself in a plush white robe and poured a glass of sparkling water, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretched out for miles below me, looking like a massive empire just waiting to be claimed. I picked up my encrypted tablet and opened my fake social media account, just to see how the Williams family was celebrating their imaginary victory. It did not take long for Courtney to post an update. She uploaded a perfectly filtered selfie from the back of DJ Range Rover, holding up a glass of champagne with a smug, obnoxious grin on her face. The caption read, "Securing the biggest bag of my career tonight." Nothing can stop a determined woman in commercial real estate. Cheers to generational wealth and early retirement. She added a bunch of money bag emojis and proudly tagged my father logistics company. She was so incredibly arrogant, so utterly convinced that her $50,000 under-the-table bribe had successfully manipulated the poor, uneducated black girl from Chicago. She was mentally spending a $600,000 commission that was actually being loaded directly into a corporate wood chipper. My phone buzzed with an incoming secure call from Richard, my proxy CEO back in Chicago. I answered it, keeping my eyes fixed on the glowing city below. Richard informed me that the title attorneys in Atlanta had just received confirmation from my father legal team that the quitclaim deed would be signed at 10 o'clock the next morning. My father lawyers were aggressively demanding that the legal representatives from Apex Holdings be present in the room to witness the signature and immediately authorize the $20 million wire transfer. They were so blinded by greed that they wanted the money in their accounts before the ink on the paper even had a chance to dry. They wanted to take the cash and run before the IRS auditors could freeze their assets. I told Richard to send our top acquiring attorneys to the Atlanta law firm tomorrow morning. I gave him extremely specific instructions on how they should behave. The Apex Holdings legal team was to arrive looking like standard corporate suits representing a faceless private equity firm. They were to bring the final closing documents, but not just any documents. They were to bring the exact paperwork required to formally absorb and liquidate the logistics company the moment the trust violation was legally triggered. I told Richard to make sure the massive wire transfer was locked and ready, but held in a strict escrow account requiring a final text message, authorization directly from the CEO, meaning me. Richard chuckled on the other end of the line, completely aware of the absolute destruction we were about to rain down on these arrogant people. He confirmed that the acquisition trap was fully set and that our financial forensic team had already quietly alerted the federal authorities to the massive irregularities in the corporate tax filings we had uncovered during our aggressive due diligence phase. My father, own loud drunken confession in the restaurant hallway, was just the beautiful cherry on top of a massive mountain of financial fraud we had already mapped out. I ended the call and sat down on the edge of the massive king-sized bed. I pulled up the voice memo app on my phone and played the recording of my father screaming about the Internal Revenue Service and the embezzled funds. His voice filled the luxurious hotel suite, sounding erratic, desperate, and incredibly foolish. I listened to it 3 times, letting the sound of his blind panic wash over me. He actually thought he had tamed his rebellious daughter. He thought he had bullied me into submission using the exact same abusive tactics he used when I was 22 years old. He could not fathom a reality where a woman he deemed a pathetic failure was actually 10 steps ahead of him, orchestrating a hostile takeover of his entire existence. I plugged my phone into the charger and turned off the lamps, letting the suite fall into complete darkness. I laid back against the soft, expensive pillows, staring up at the dark ceiling. Tomorrow morning I was going to walk into a room full of arrogant, greedy people who thought they owned the world. I was going to let them smile and gloat and tap their expensive pens on their leather folios. I was going to let them think they had won the ultimate prize. And then I was going to drop the heavy blade of the guillotine right on their necks. I closed my eyes and fell into the most peaceful and deeply satisfying sleep I had experienced in 10 long years. The storm was finally here. The morning sun broke over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across my luxurious hotel suite. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror and shed the pathetic, struggling daughter persona for the final time. The cheap retail suit from the night before was already at the bottom of the trash can where it belonged. Today I was dressing for an execution. I pulled on a bespoke midnight blue Tom Ford power suit that had been meticulously tailored to my exact measurements. The fabric draped flawlessly, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable wealth and ruthless corporate authority. I fastened a $50,000 Cartier Panther watch around my wrist, the heavy diamonds catching the early morning light. I pinned my natural hair up into a sharp, intimidating crown. I looked exactly like what I was, a corporate predator ready to devour an entire ecosystem. My three lead acquiring attorneys arrived at my suite precisely at 9:15. They were ruthless, brilliant legal sharks from Chicago, wearing immaculate gray suits and carrying thick leather briefcases filled with corporate destruction. We rode down the private elevator in total silence. A black chauffeur-driven Maybach was waiting for us at the curb. We climbed into the plush leather seats and headed toward Buckhead. I watched the familiar streets of my hometown glide past the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of absolute calm. The anger that had fueled me for a decade had condensed into a cold, hard diamond in my chest. The strategy was already locked in place. The trap was fully armed. At exactly 10 o'clock, we arrived at the prestigious high-end corporate law firm my father had chosen for the closing. The offices were a towering monument to Southern wealth, with dark mahogany-paneled walls, polished marble floors, and massive glass windows overlooking the sprawling city below. The receptionist took one look at my suit and my legal entourage and immediately sat up straighter, scrambling to guide us down the wide carpeted hallway leading to the main executive conference room. As we approached the heavy frosted glass doors, I could already hear the loud, obnoxious voices of my family echoing through the corridor. They were celebrating a victory they had not yet secured. I paused just outside the door, holding up a hand to stop my attorneys. I wanted to listen to their delusion for just a few seconds more. Through the thick glass, I watched them basking in their unearned glory. Valerie was leaning across the massive conference table, dripping in gaudy diamond jewelry she had clearly bought on credit just for this occasion. She was bragging loudly to one of the local escrow clerks about her upcoming first-class vacation to Dubai, detailing exactly how she planned to spend the next month shopping in the exclusive Emirates malls. DJ was standing by the window, adjusting his cheap tie and acting like he was the brilliant new CEO of a massive logistics empire. He was using corporate buzzwords he barely understood to impress the junior lawyers in the room, puffing out his chest with an arrogant swagger that made him look completely ridiculous. Brenda. My biological mother sat quietly in a corner leather chair, clutching her purse and staring greedily at the legal pads on the table, dreaming of her paid-off mortgage and her guaranteed alimony. Derek Sr. was pacing back and forth at the head of the table. He was sweating slightly, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, but he was working incredibly hard to project a mask of absolute arrogant authority to everyone in the room. And then there was Courtney. She was sitting near the center of the table, frantically checking the screen of her smartphone every 2 seconds. She was mentally counting the $600,000 real estate commission she thought was just minutes away from hitting her bank account. Her leg was bouncing up and down with nervous, greedy energy. I reached out and pushed the heavy glass doors open. The deep thud of the doors swinging wide immediately sucked all the air out of the room. The loud boasting abruptly died. Valerie stopped talking mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. DJ dropped his hand from his tie, completely freezing by the window. Every single pair of eyes in that room locked onto me, and the collective shock that washed over their faces was absolutely delicious. Gone was the vulnerable, broken girl in the cheap, off-the-rack clothing. I walked into that boardroom radiating pure, terrifying power. My bespoke Tom Ford suit cut a sharp, imposing silhouette against the soft lighting of the room. The diamonds on my Cartier watch flashed brilliantly, sending prisms of light dancing across the mahogany walls as I casually adjusted my cuff. My 3 corporate attorneys marched in perfect synchronization right behind me, their expressions set in identical masks of freezing professional hostility. They looked like an execution squad. Courtney was the first person to break the stunned, heavy silence. Her fragile white superiority complex immediately went into overdrive, trying desperately to rationalize the overwhelming display of wealth I had just brought into the room. She refused to accept the visual evidence in front of her. She let out a loud, forced scoff that sounded more like a dying bird than an actual laugh. Renting a designer suit to look important in front of the Chicago buyers. Courtney sneered, crossing her arms tightly across her chest and rolling her eyes. That is real cute, Renee, but you are not fooling anyone here. We all know you are completely broke. Just sign the paper so we can all get paid, and you can return that outfit before the rental agency charges you a late fee. I did not even dignify her pathetic microaggression with a verbal response. I did not look at her. I did not look at Valerie or DJ or my biological mother. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father, whose face had suddenly turned a sickly shade of gray. I walked straight past their side of the table, completely ignoring the small, uncomfortable folding chair they had clearly designated for me at the far corner of the room. Instead, I walked all the way to the other end and pulled out the massive leather executive chair at the absolute head of the glass conference table. It was the seat of power, the position usually reserved for the most dominant person in the negotiation. I sat down, crossing my legs smoothly while my 3 Chicago attorneys fanned out beside me. They opened their thick leather briefcases and pulled out stacks of dense acquisition files in perfect, frightening unison, placing them onto the glass table with a heavy, synchronized thud. The local Atlanta escrow attorney who was officially overseeing the transaction looked completely bewildered by the sudden, violent shift in the room dynamic. He glanced nervously at my father, and then back at my highly intimidating legal team, clearly sensing that he had just walked onto a financial battlefield he was entirely unprepared for. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, clearing his throat to break the suffocating tension. The nervous escrow attorney picked up a pristine, crisp piece of legal parchment from his manila folder. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding the fresh quitclaim deed down the length of the long glass table. The paper glided smoothly, stopping directly in front of my hands. The signature line at the bottom was completely blank, waiting for the stroke of a pen to release a $20 million commercial empire. Derek Sr. was breathing heavily now. The sight of my corporate attorneys had rattled him to his very core, but his massive, fragile ego refused to let him back down in front of an audience. He marched over to my end of the long table and forcefully tapped the face of his heavy gold Rolex watch with a thick, trembling finger. "Sign it." He barked, his voice tight with mounting anxiety and barely suppressed rage. "Stop playing these stupid power games, Renee. The legal representatives from Apex Holdings are supposed to call into this room in exactly 2 minutes to confirm the clear title. Do not embarrass me in front of these corporate executives from Chicago. Sign the paper right now so they can authorize the wire transfer and we can be done with this miserable family favor." I leaned back deeply into the plush leather of the executive chair, resting my hands gracefully on the cool glass table. I looked down at the blank quitclaim deed and then looked slowly back up at the man who had abandoned me a decade ago. I did not reach for the pen lying next to the document. I just sat there, letting the seconds tick by, letting the agonizing silence stretch out and wrap tightly around his throat. The heavy quiet in his boardroom was suddenly shattered by a loud, sharp, buzzing sound. Derek Sr.'s phone was vibrating violently against the glass table right next to his sweaty hand. He snatched the device up with lightning speed, his eyes darting frantically to the glowing screen. His face instantly flushed with a mixture of immense, overwhelming relief and greedy anticipation. He let out a loud breath that sounded like a laugh. "It is the proxy lawyer from Apex Holdings," my father announced loudly, making sure every single person in the room, including the smirking Courtney and the grinning Valerie, heard him clearly. He held the phone up high in the air like it was a winning lottery ticket, a golden pass to his financial salvation. "They just sent an urgent text message regarding the funds." He cleared his throat dramatically and read the text message out loud to the room, puffing out his chest to project his imaginary dominance and control over the situation. "We have the $20 million funds fully secured in our escrow accounts. We are ready to proceed with the transaction immediately. We just need final confirmation from our CEO before releasing the wire transfer to your business accounts." Valerie let out a high-pitched squeal of delight, clapping her manicured hands together as she envisioned her Dubai shopping spree. Courtney literally bounced on her heels, her eyes wide with unadulterated greed, knowing her massive commission check was practically in the mail. DJ pumped his fist in the air, celebrating a hollow victory. They were mere seconds away from their massive undeserved payday. Derek Sr. slammed his heavy hand down flat on the glass table, right next to the quitclaim deed, making the pen rattle against the surface. He glared across the short distance separating us, his eyes burning with absolute frantic demand and desperate authority. "You heard them," he growled, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson as he leaned over the table toward me. "The buyer is waiting for the green light to send the money. Pick up the damn pen and sign the deed right now, Renee. The CEO is waiting for the confirmation." The entire room held its collective breath, waiting for my final submission. They expected me to finally crack under the immense pressure of the ticking clock, the intimidating boardroom, and the sheer weight of my father's screaming authority. They expected the broke daughter to surrender and take her pathetic $5,000 payout. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I slowly and deliberately reached into the pocket of my midnight blue Tom Ford jacket and pulled out my personal cell phone. I kept my movements incredibly smooth and completely unhurried, contrasting violently with the frantic, panicked energy radiating from the other side of the table. I unlocked the digital screen, tapping the smooth glass surface with a quiet, rhythmic precision. I looked my father dead in the eyes, holding his furious, desperate gaze with absolute zero emotion. I did not blink. I did not smile. I simply stared straight through the man who had tried to bury me 10 years ago. As I opened the direct encrypted communication line to the proxy lawyer, sitting at the Apex Holdings headquarters back in Chicago. I typed exactly 4 words into the blank text message field. I hit send. A split second later, a sharp, piercing chime echoed through the dead-silent boardroom. The sound came directly from the sleek smartphone resting on the glass table right next to my father's sweating hand. It was the text message from the proxy lawyer at Apex Holdings. The final confirmation he had been begging for. Derek Sr. snatched the device off the table, his fingers trembling with greedy anticipation. He unlocked the screen and opened the message, expecting to see the authorization code for his $20 million salvation. I watched his eyes scan the short line of text. It took exactly 2 seconds for his entire world to completely shatter. The deep, angry crimson color drained entirely from his face, leaving behind a sickly ash-gray pallor that made him look like a walking corpse. His jaw fell open, attempting to form words, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed. His hands began to shake so violently that he could no longer grip the device. The expensive smartphone slipped through his trembling fingers and slammed onto the thick glass table, spinning slowly until the bright screen came to a dead stop directly facing Courtney. Courtney leaned over, her blonde hair falling over her shoulder as she peered at the glowing screen to see what had caused her father-in-law to short-circuit. Her eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as she read the 4 simple words I had just sent from my own phone mere inches away. "I am the buyer." Courtney choked on a gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at the screen, and then her terrified eyes slowly tracked upward, locking onto my cold, expressionless face. She finally understood. The faceless Chicago corporation, the massive private equity firm, the $20 million lifeline. They were all desperately clinging to. It was all me. I was Apex Holdings. I placed both of my hands firmly on the glass table and slowly stood up from the executive chair. My 3 corporate attorneys mirrored my movement, standing up in perfect, terrifying unison, their briefcases completely forgotten. I reached out and placed my manicured fingernail on the pristine, white quitclaim deed that was supposed to steal my inheritance. With a slow, deliberate push, I slid the unsigned document all the way back down the long glass table. It glided smoothly, stopping right in front of my paralyzed hands. "This land is not worth $20 million, Derek," I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. "The commercial appraisal for this 50-acre plot was finalized last month at $35 million. You were trying to fire sale my inheritance at a $15 million loss just to get fast cash to hide your massive tax fraud from the Internal Revenue Service. Valerie let out a pathetic whimpering sound, her diamond-covered hands shaking violently. DJ was staring at me like I was an alien creature he could not comprehend. Brenda. My biological mother had stopped breathing altogether, her eyes wide with mounting panic. And thanks to your loud, sloppy recorded confession in the restaurant hallway last night, I continued, not breaking eye contact with the broken man. At the other end of the table, I am no longer interested in buying out your life estate. I am not giving you $20 million to save you from federal prison. As the legally designated primary beneficiary holding 51% of the generational trust, I am officially exercising my rights under the fiduciary breach clause. You have grossly mismanaged the assets, you have embezzled corporate funds, and you have attempted to commit real estate fraud against the trust. I paused, letting the devastating legal reality sink deep into his bones. Therefore, I am legally seizing total control of Williams Logistics effective immediately. I am freezing all corporate accounts, suspending your executive privileges, and my legal team will begin the immediate liquidation of all your personal assets to repay the massive debt you owe to my trust. You do not own a company anymore, Derek. You do not own the trucks. You do not own the land. You own absolutely nothing. The boardroom instantly erupted into pure, unfiltered chaos. The illusion of their wealthy, perfect family completely disintegrated into a pathetic display of desperate, greedy animals fighting for survival. Courtney let out a blood-curdling scream of pure agony. My commission, she shrieked, tearing at her own hair, her professional facade totally destroyed. My $600,000, you cannot do this to me. Renee, I already put the down payment on the Porsche, you evil, vindictive girl. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically, mourning the loss of the massive payout she had used to justify her miserable marriage to my incompetent brother. Valerie was hyperventilating, her hands frantically touching the expensive diamond necklace around her throat, as if she was trying to protect it from being repossessed. The boats. She gasped, her eyes wild with panic. The beach condo in Florida. The bank is going to take it all. Derek, do something, you promised me we were safe. She began hitting his shoulder, screaming at him to fix a situation that was completely unfixable. Her luxurious lifestyle had just been fed into a corporate wood chipper, and she was entirely collateral damage. Brenda. My biological mother completely lost whatever shred of dignity she had left. She shoved her chair back and literally fell to her knees on the polished marble floor. She crawled toward my end of the table, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Renee, please, she begged, sobbing violently, her hands reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. I am your mother. Please do not cut off his accounts. He pays my mortgage. He pays my credit cards. I will lose everything. I will be on the street. Please forgive me. I should have stood up for you 10 years ago. I am so sorry. I took a deliberate step back, moving out of her reach. My expression remained completely frozen. You chose your alimony over your daughter Brenda, I said softly, looking down at the pathetic woman groveling at my feet. Now you have neither. Enjoy the consequences of your investment. The sheer coldness of my rejection was the final spark that ignited DJ. His bloated, unearned ego could not handle the fact that the sister he had mocked and thrown out into the rain was now the supreme ruler of his entire universe. The golden child snapped. I will end you, you stupid brat, DJ roared, his face twisting into a mask of violent rage. He lunged across the heavy glass conference table, knocking over water pitchers and scattering legal documents, intending to wrap his hands around my throat. He never even made it halfway. The two massive private security contractors I had strategically stationed just outside the frosted glass doors burst into the room the second he raised his voice. Before DJ could even touch the lapel of my Tom Ford suit, they grabbed him by the back of his cheap collar and slammed him face first into the marble floor with a bone-crushing thud. DJ let out a pathetic yelp of pain as they pinned his arms behind his back, planting a heavy tactical boot firmly between his shoulder blades, neutralizing the fake heir apparent in a matter of seconds. I did not even flinch. I simply stepped around his groaning body and walked slowly toward the other end of the long glass table where my father was sitting. Derek Sr. was hyperventilating, his chest heaving irregularly as he clutched his chest. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting around the room at the absolute destruction of his legacy. The king had been completely stripped of his crown, his kingdom, and his freedom all in the span of 5 minutes. I stopped right in front of him, leaning down slightly so my voice would echo clearly in the dead silent room over the sounds of his ragged breathing and the sobbing of the women. You disowned me by a text message 10 years ago because I did not fit into your perfect new family, I said, my voice sharp and cutting like a diamond blade. You told me I was a failure, and you demanded that I never contact you again. You told me I was cut off. I stood back up, adjusting the cuffs of my suit and looking down at the broken, ruined man who used to terrorize my childhood. I am just honoring your wishes, Derek. I continued, my tone dripping with freezing finality. I have officially cut you off. You have 30 days to vacate my property before I send the sheriff to throw your things into the street. Do not ever contact me again. I turned my back on the entire toxic bloodline. I did not look at my mother crying on the floor. I did not look at my brother pinned to the marble. I did not look at the screaming sister-in-law or the panicking stepmother. I walked straight out of the heavy frosted glass doors, my 3 corporate attorneys and my security detail falling into perfect formation right behind me. We strode down the long carpeted hallway of the law firm, the frantic, chaotic screaming of the Williams family slowly fading away behind us. The heavy glass elevator doors slid shut, sealing them in their own self-made hell. I stepped out of the building and into the bright, warm Atlanta sun, sliding smoothly into the plush leather seat of my waiting chauffeur-driven Maybach. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and let the smooth engine carry me away into my perfectly silent, untouchable empire. The screen cuts to black. The most powerful response to betrayal is silent success. When toxic family members try to bury you, they do not realize they are planting a seed. This story teaches us that blood does not equal loyalty. You owe absolutely nothing to people who only value you when it benefits them. Instead of begging for a seat at a table where you are disrespected, build your own table and buy the entire building. True vindication does not come from screaming or crying. It comes from outworking your enemies in the dark and letting success make the final statement for your life. If you have ever walked away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, hit that subscribe button and share your own story of triumph in the comments below.